There is a place within you no one else sees. No matter where you go, whether you're sitting in a crowded room, walking through a noisy street, or lying awake at night, this place is always there. It's quiet, but not always peaceful. Sometimes it blooms with calm clarity. Sometimes it grows tangled with anxiety, self-doubt, and distraction. You may not have a name for it, but the Stoics did. They called it the mind. Not in the scientific sense, but in the spiritual, practical, human sense. To them, your mind is your garden. And whether you're aware of it or not, you are the gardener. Each moment you're planting something, a belief, a reaction, a fear, a hope. Some things grow wild, some things are left to decay. Some are deliberately placed and carefully watered, like a rose that takes years to bloom. This isn't just metaphor, it's daily life. And if you don't choose what gets planted, the world will. News headlines, social media envy, people's opinions, childhood memories. That one sentence someone said to you 5 years ago, you'll carry it like a vine that wraps itself around everything, until it's hard to tell what was ever truly yours. But here's the quiet power of Stoicism. You can take back the soil. You can clear space. You can pull up roots that no longer serve you. You can choose what to cultivate, moment by moment, word by word, breath by breath. And no, it doesn't require perfection or constant positivity. That's not the Stoic way. This is not about pretending the world is always calm. It's about creating a still place within you, even when storms rage outside. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, nowhere can a person find a more peaceful retreat than in his own soul. That line has stayed with me, because I know what it feels like to lose that inner space, to feel like your thoughts are overrun, like you're reacting to life instead of responding to it. And I've learned slowly that cultivating your mind isn't a weekend project. It's a life's work. But it begins today, with awareness, with intention, with the first seed. If this kind of journey speaks to you, if you're the kind of person who reflects, grows, and looks inward as deeply as you look outward, then consider subscribing. I create these videos for minds like yours, minds that want to grow well, not just fast. Because in a noisy world, a still mind becomes a rare and powerful thing. Let's begin the tending. Number 1, weeding the mind, removing what doesn't serve. You don't need to grow everything you've inherited. That voice in your head telling you you're not enough, that reflex to compare yourself to someone else's highlight reel, that narrative that says you're too late, you're not ready, they're better than you, these are not facts. These are weeds. And every gardener knows, before you can plant something new, you must first clear the space. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus taught that some things are up to us and some are not. But what he didn't say directly, what you discover only when you live with that idea, is that most of what causes mental suffering isn't up to you. You spend so much of your inner life wrestling things that don't belong to you. You try to control how others see you. You overthink things you've already done. You carry judgments from people who don't even understand you. You dwell in old memories or worry over future ones that haven't happened yet. These are not yours to carry, but they've taken root. Somewhere along the way they grew, fed by repetition, by pain, by silence. And if you never stop to examine your inner garden, they'll thrive simply because no one challenged them. Weeding isn't glamorous, it's uncomfortable. It asks you to get your hands dirty with your own thoughts. So let's begin there, with honesty. Ask yourself, what do I replay in my mind that only drains me? What belief about myself causes more harm than growth? Who or what do I keep reacting to, even when it steals my peace? If a friend told you they weren't good enough, or that they needed to be perfect to be worthy, you'd stop them. You'd offer compassion. But when your own mind whispers these things, do you even notice? Let me share something I've realized over time. The thoughts that do the most damage are often the ones you've stopped noticing. They run in the background like software bugs. You feel the symptoms, tension, avoidance, anxiety, but don't trace the root. That's why weeding isn't a one-time purge. It's a practice of attention, a discipline of noticing. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But this strength isn't loud. It doesn't come from shouting affirmations. It comes from quietly pulling out what doesn't belong. You remove what's false. You discard what's toxic. You challenge what's unhelpful. And in doing so, you create space. Like a field cleared after a fire, you begin again, not from destruction, but from renewal. Here's a metaphor that's helped me when I forget. Imagine your mind is a garden with limited soil. If you let weeds grow unchecked, they consume the nutrients meant for your deeper virtues, your courage, your clarity, your purpose. Even good seeds won't thrive if the weeds outcompete them, so start small. Each time you notice a thought that only causes harm, pause. Don't fight it, don't judge it, just say quietly, "This doesn't serve me," then let it go, again and again and again. You're not erasing your past, you're choosing your future. You'll notice something strange too. The more space you create, the quieter your mind becomes. And in that silence, new things emerge. Ideas you didn't know were there, a sense of calm you thought was impossible, a feeling not of being done, but of being more you. Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And the greatest waste is not time, it's attention spent on things that poison your garden. That's why you must become a disciplined weeder. Catch the mental weeds early, before they flower into habits. Release the stories you inherited, but no longer believe. Pull the roots that grow from fear, not love. And just as importantly, forgive yourself for the times you didn't. There will always be new weeds. That's the nature of the mind. But you get to choose whether you let them grow. You get to choose what stays. You get to choose the kind of inner landscape you want to wake up in each day. So let me ask you, what are you ready to remove? What would your life feel like if you finally let go of the thoughts that never belonged to you? That's where the real clearing begins. Number 2, planting intentional seeds. The power of daily thought. Once the weeds are cleared, the soil is open, and in that space comes responsibility. Because nature doesn't allow for emptiness, something will grow. If not planted with intention, your mind will default to the seeds of your environment. Marketing, opinions, complaints, noise. It takes no effort to absorb the world's thoughts. But to plant your own, that's cultivation. Marcus Aurelius understood this intimately. In his private reflections, he reminded himself, "Your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought." That single sentence is a quiet warning. It's also a promise. If you dwell on envy, comparison, fear, your mind begins to form around those emotions. But if you return day after day to thoughts of stillness, acceptance, purpose, something else takes root. Let's break this down with the metaphor we've been carrying. A garden is not just cleared once. It must be replanted, or else nature fills it with whatever is nearby. Wind-blown seeds, random sprouts, invasive species. So too with your mind. When you wake up and immediately check your phone, you're scattering random seeds, unfiltered, unconscious. When you scroll mindlessly or absorb someone else's drama or chase validation, you're watering seeds that were never yours. But imagine if, instead, your first thoughts were planted by you, with care, with reflection, with truth. Maybe you sit quietly and ask, what do I value today? Where is my attention most needed? What can I let go of to be more present? This isn't about toxic positivity. This is about quiet authorship. You begin choosing the garden you'll live in. One of the most powerful Stoic tools is the practice of daily examination, what the Romans called evening review, and the Greeks called prosoche, or attention. Seneca wrote in his letters that every night before sleep, he would ask himself, what did I do well today? What could I improve? Where did I waste time or give in to emotion? It wasn't judgment, it was gardening. Looking at what grew, what didn't, and where to plant better tomorrow. You don't need a ritual, you just need a pause. A moment to observe your own mind instead of being swept along by it. Let me share how I've practiced this in my own life. I used to believe that inspiration had to strike on its own, that clarity would just come if I waited long enough or listened to enough wise people. But eventually, I realized something simple and uncomfortable. Clarity isn't found, it's planted. Now I ask myself each morning, what mindset do I want to cultivate today? Just one. Patience, discipline, gratitude, focus, compassion. I don't try to master them all at once. I choose one seed, and throughout the day, I return to it, like watering a plant. Not too much, not too little, but enough to remember what I'm growing. Some days I fail, I lose my temper, I forget to pause, I get caught in old patterns. But even that is part of the tending. The point isn't perfection, it's participation. Your presence in your own mental life is what creates growth. Here's a metaphor that helps. Your thoughts are like sunlight. Wherever you shine your attention, that's where energy flows. If you shine it on worry, worry grows. If you shine it on purpose, purpose strengthens. If you shine it on beauty, you begin to see beauty in places others overlook. So you begin to choose moment by moment. Will I water fear or courage? Will I feed anger or understanding? Will I fertilize regret or learning? The Stoics never said emotions were bad. They said they were signals, but signals are not seeds. You don't have to grow every feeling into a full-blown narrative. You can feel doubt and still plant resolve. You can feel grief and still plant presence. You can feel anger and still plant restraint. This is the art of inner sovereignty, and like all art, it begins with small, consistent gestures. Let's make this practical. Start tomorrow by planting 3 thoughts. 1, a truth about yourself that strengthens you. 2, a value you want to embody that day. 3, a reminder of what is not worth your energy. Write them down, speak them aloud, whisper them in silence. It doesn't matter how, but it matters that you do it. Because if you don't, the world will plant its own thoughts, and most of them will not serve you. So let me ask you, if your mind was a garden others could walk through, what would you want them to see? Not for their approval, but for the integrity of your own soul. Every thought is a seed. Every belief is a branch. Every habit is a tree. And you are the gardener. Choose carefully what you plant and water it with patience. Number 3, tending with patience, embracing the seasons of growth. Growth, real growth, doesn't rush. It doesn't look like a straight line. It doesn't bloom every day. It doesn't offer instant proof that your efforts are working. Sometimes it looks like nothing is happening. You meditate, reflect, resist an old habit, and still feel like you're in the same place. You pull the weeds and plant new seeds, and the soil just sits there. This is the part where most people give up, but it's also the moment when Stoicism becomes most real. Seneca once wrote, "No tree becomes rooted and sturdy unless many a wind assails it, for by its very tossing it tightens its grip and plants its roots more securely." You are not meant to flourish every moment. You're meant to endure, to deepen, to become resilient, and to do so slowly, season by season. Let's return to our metaphor. A garden is never in full bloom all year round. There are cold stretches, quiet winters, muddy storms. There are moments of drought when nothing feels alive inside you. But underneath, the roots are working. Growth is happening invisibly in the dark. Your mind works the same way. Patience is not passive. It's not waiting with folded arms. It's trusting the process while staying committed to the work. But this is where modern life fights back. Everything today is urgent, instant, measurable. You're told to optimize your mind, hack your habits, upgrade your productivity, but a mind like a garden doesn't thrive under pressure. It thrives with presence, noticing, listening, adjusting, accepting. There's a quiet rhythm to real transformation, and you can't rush rhythm. You move with it. You might feel frustrated when your emotional responses don't change as fast as your intentions, when you still flinch with irritation or sink into overthinking, even after weeks of practicing calm. But here's a reflection from my own journey. Progress often shows up last in the places you're looking most closely. You may not notice that you're more patient with others, that you breathe more before reacting, that you recover faster after falling into self-doubt. It's subtle, like the first signs of spring, barely visible, but unmistakable once you know where to look. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes your guide. Marcus Aurelius didn't just write about virtue, he returned to it every day through the repetition of thought. That repetition is where strength is built. And Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, didn't arrive at philosophy through success. He arrived through shipwreck. He lost everything and began again, not by forcing outcomes, but by aligning with nature's pace. That idea, living in accordance with nature, is central to Stoicism. And nature never rushes. A tree doesn't doubt its pace because another blooms earlier. The sun doesn't apologize for taking hours to rise. And your mind doesn't need to be fully healed in order to be deeply worthy. In a garden, there is a season for planting, a season for pruning, a season for rest. And so it is with you. Let me offer another metaphor. Imagine you are tending to a bonsai tree. It requires daily care but grows incredibly slowly. You may not notice its change for weeks, months. But one day you look at it and realize it's shaped differently. It holds itself with quiet strength. That's how your character grows, not in fireworks, but in form. Each day you practice patience. When you don't react to provocation, when you sit with discomfort instead of running from it, you shape your inner self, even when no one sees, especially then. I've learned that some of the most important changes I've ever made took the longest to reveal themselves. There were days I felt nothing was working, that I was still too reactive, too distracted, too uncertain. But those were the days when the roots were anchoring deeper. I just didn't know it yet. And so I say this to you. If you're in one of those seasons, keep showing up. Even when your thoughts feel messy, even when you doubt whether this practice is working, even when nothing feels like it's changing. Because tending is the practice, and every practice is a statement of value. It's a way of saying, this matters to me, even if no one claps. This matters to me, even if I stumble. This matters to me because I've chosen to grow on purpose. Let me ask you, what kind of person are you becoming while no one is watching? That answer, more than any goal or outcome, defines the garden you're cultivating. Some days will feel barren, others bursting with clarity. But if you return to the soil each day with patience and presence, the seasons will turn, the blooms will come, and you will realize you weren't standing still, you were taking root. Number 4, the inner garden and the outer world. Cultivating for others too. There's a moment when you realize, this garden you've been tending, this quiet, invisible space within your mind, it doesn't exist for you alone. Yes, it begins inside. Yes, it's deeply personal. But eventually, it begins to spill over into your relationships, into your work, into the way you move through the world. A calm mind doesn't just bring you peace. It becomes a source of peace for others. And that's when your garden transforms. It's no longer just a private retreat. It becomes a sanctuary others can feel, even if they don't know why. Musonius Rufus, often called the Roman Socrates, believed that philosophy wasn't just for inner tranquility, it was for service. He taught that true virtue must be lived in action, not isolation. And part of that action is how your inner cultivation shows up in your presence. Not in loud speeches, not in forced advice, but in how you listen, how you respond when tension rises, how you treat others when no one's watching. This is where your inner garden becomes contagious. Let me offer a metaphor here. Imagine two people walk into a room. One has a scattered, overgrown mind, full of noise, agitation, urgency. The other has spent years tending to stillness, clarity, and self-control. Both speak, but only one leaves the room calmer than they entered. This is the ripple of the Stoic mind. It influences without imposition. It teaches without preaching. It moves through the world, not to dominate, but to contribute. This is not about being perfect. In fact, the more you accept your own humanity, the more space you create for others to be human too. When you've faced your own anger, you hold space for someone else's. When you've sat with your own sadness, you become more compassionate toward another's. When you've uprooted your own judgment, you stop projecting it onto those around you. And when someone lashes out or spirals in chaos, you don't meet them at that level. You pause, you return to your cultivated soil, and from there, you choose how to respond. This is emotional self-governance. And in a world where reactivity is the norm, restraint becomes radical. Lao Tzu once wrote, "Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power." That line echoes deeply for me, because the more I grow inwardly, the more I realize power isn't control over people, it's clarity within yourself. And that clarity changes things. I remember a conversation I had not long ago. Someone close to me was spiraling, venting anger and frustration about things they couldn't control. A younger version of me would have jumped in to fix it or tried to counter their feelings with logic. But that day, I didn't react. I just listened. I didn't take their storm personally. I stayed rooted. And you know what happened? They calmed. They breathed. Not because I said the perfect thing, but because I didn't escalate the chaos. Sometimes the most loving thing you can offer is your steadiness. Your garden becomes a refuge. Not for everyone, not always, but often enough to matter. This is why Stoicism isn't a cold, emotionless philosophy. It's the opposite. It's the cultivation of virtue that benefits others, not just yourself. And that includes the hard work of softening your need to always be right, softening your tendency to judge, softening the harsh inner voice that spills outward into criticism. Because when you remove weeds from your own mind, you stop planting them in other people's. And when you plant peace, intention, and virtue inside yourself, your presence becomes nourishing. People feel safer around you, more seen, more grounded, even if they can't explain why. It's not because you're trying to be something, it's because you're living from what you've grown. So let me ask you, what do others absorb when they stand beside the garden of your mind? Do they walk away more centered or more scattered? Do they feel heard or judged? Do they feel your presence as pressure or as peace? These are not moral judgments, they're invitations. Because if the answer feels heavy, good. That's your direction. That's your signal to cultivate more deliberately. This is why the Stoic garden is never self-contained. It grows upward, outward, toward the common good. Not to impress, not to prove anything, but because that is the natural result of living in harmony with yourself. Your children feel it. Your partner senses it. Your colleagues notice it. Even strangers at the grocery store absorb something quiet and meaningful from the way you show up. You become different, not louder, not more charismatic, but anchored. And in a drifting world, anchors are rare. So don't keep your cultivation locked inside. Let it move through your words. Let it reflect in how you say no without guilt, and yes with full presence. Let it guide how you offer patience where once you would have snapped. How you show understanding in the exact moment when you once sought revenge. Because when your inner world is well tended, your outer world slowly begins to change. Not overnight, not dramatically, but seed by seed. Until one day someone tells you, "There's something about you that makes me feel calmer," and you'll smile, knowing it wasn't magic, it was cultivation. You've walked through the garden. You've seen the weeds, those overgrown thoughts that never served you. You've planted seeds, intentional thoughts rooted in truth, not noise. You've weathered the seasons, practicing patience when nothing seemed to bloom. And you've extended your cultivation, letting it ripple outward, touching others without needing applause. And now here you are, back at the beginning, back at the soil. But you're not the same, because once you become aware of your mind as a garden, you can't unsee it. You start noticing what you let grow. You begin choosing with care. You understand that every reaction, every belief, every word plants something. And that awareness, Tim, is freedom. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's deeply alive. Marcus Aurelius once reflected, "Look well into thyself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if thou wilt always look." That's what this has been about. Not becoming someone new, but remembering what's always been within you. You are the gardener, not the weather, not the weeds, not the old harvests that failed. You. And that means every day, no matter how scattered or overgrown your thoughts may feel, you can return. You can step into that quiet, invisible space inside yourself and tend to it with care. Pull one weed, plant one thought, water one value. That's it. You don't have to fix everything at once. You just have to keep showing up with presence, with honesty, with intention. Because in the end, a well-tended mind doesn't need to shout. It doesn't chase approval. It doesn't force outcomes. It simply grows, calmly, quietly, and in alignment with what matters. So as you return to your life, remember, no matter how noisy the world becomes, you can always come back to the soil, to the breath, to the space within you that no one else controls. Tend to it, and in time, it will bloom.